it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Well, good evening, my dear friends. Now, tonight's feature-length story is actually a follow-up to one that I did early last year. Now, this works as a standalone story, but if you're interested in the prequel, then the link is in the video description below. Now, on to tonight's story. The Last of the Dawn by Tanner 627. Part 1. Samantha rode in the passenger seat of the SUV, listening to the quiet, calm music which played from the radio. Josh was driving them down the highway, taking them away from the damaged lodge which they'd spent the night in. The Wendigo which had attacked them had all returned to the mines when the sun had risen that morning, leaving behind only tracks and scratches on their door. Samantha glanced out of her window at the forest and the jagged peaks of the Canadian Rockies which loomed over them. The forest swept slowly by, snow still blanketing everything in it with its solid white coat. Icicles hung from the branches of the nearby trees, slowly dripping water onto the ground below, causing them to sag with their weight. A small herd of deer grazed beneath the cover of some of these hanging branches, pawing the ground to search for clover beneath the snow. Upon hearing the passing vehicle, the deer raised their heads, staring at Samantha with wide black eyes, watching as she and Josh passed by. It had stopped snowing earlier that morning, giving them a temporary break from constant winter storms, which were quite common that far north, where blizzards could be very dangerous. They'd been driving for just over an hour, stopping only once in their journey, to siphon gas from an abandoned car, which had been left on the side of the road, its windshield broken, its driver and passenger side doors left open, as if whoever had been driving had left in a hurry. Samantha glanced beside her at Josh, who was behind the wheel of the SUV, his eyes on the road, driving slowly in the icy conditions. They'd not seen anyone else on the road, not since they'd first arrived at the lodge, after escaping from their hometown. Since then, Jess had joined them, revealing that Michael had intentionally killed Josh's sisters as part of some bizarre ritual he'd done, with the help from Emily. Jess now sat in the back of their SUV, traveling with them to their new home. Josh no longer felt any anger towards her, as she'd been a victim just like his sisters had. In a way, Samantha was glad to finally have Jess back in their group. She'd rather missed having another woman to talk to. Michael had been trying to capture Jess when he attacked, because she'd managed to escape from him at the sanatorium in which he and his uncle were staying. The morning after this attack, Michael and Emily had gone missing, and Samantha assumed them to be dead, but she was unsure of this. Following the attack, they decided to drive over to Strawberry, a nearby alpine town. Josh had made contact with a group of survivors there by radio, and this group was desperate for new members, as several of their people had been killed in a skirmish with a Fedra patrol from America. Once finding out that Samantha had medical training, they'd practically begged she and Josh to come, promising them a place to live in the town. They were meant to meet a small patrol just outside of town, who'd escort them there. Samantha was eager to get far away from the lodge, where the Wendigo stalked the night. The savage creatures had likely killed Michael and Emily, though Samantha was unsure of this fact. No bodies had been found, so the pair could have escaped back to the sanatorium. Michael had wanted to capture Jessica, but she and Josh had stopped him, after a group of infected had killed all of Michael's men, allowing she and Josh to get the upper hand on both he and Emily. Samantha could recall the look of hate in Emily's eyes when she'd held that point of her sword against her throat. If Jess hadn't shot Emily in the shoulder, then she might have shot Samantha or had her throat cut. It was a bitter irony that the gunshot fired by Jess might have been what ultimately saved Emily's life. Samantha sighed, looking down the road. It was an overcast day. Grey snow clouds still hung in the air. Yet another winter storm was approaching, one that would arrive in just a few hours. Down the road, Samantha could see a distant bright red burning light, one that lit up the whole road. making Samantha sit up in her seat and take notice. "Oh, that must be the patrol. They were supposed to signal us with those red road flares," stated Josh. He drove towards the distant light, eager to see the town which he would soon be calling home. "How many people live in Strawberry? Will we know any of them from before all of this?" inquired Jess. She still sat in the back seat of the SUV, having been silent for most of the drive. Samantha looked at Jess. "I don't know. I don't think very many people survive from home. Yeah, it really was bad there when Josh and I left. Though, I suppose there's always hope," replied Samantha. "Well, I wouldn't mind seeing Christopher again," commented Josh. And Samantha nodded in agreement, returning her gaze to the road ahead, where 2 pairs of horses stood tied to a tree, standing next to the lit road flare. The horses were attended by a single man who stood guard over them. The man stopped what he was doing upon seeing the approaching SUV. Josh waved to the man, pulling to the stop not far from where the horses were tied to the tree. "Right, I think this is it," stated Josh, unbuckling his seatbelt. Why is there only 1 man?" "I thought they were going to send a patrol," replied Samantha. Josh shrugged. "Maybe they're off searching for us," he suggested. Samantha remained unconvinced, though. She undid her seatbelt, stepping out of the SUV. Once outside, a sudden surge of cold wind hit her, making Samantha glad that she'd worn a good thick coat. The man who'd waved to them stood waiting by the pair of horses. He wore a grey coat and dark brown pants. A lever-action rifle was slung over his shoulder, and he wore a bandolier of bullets across his chest. The man appeared to be young, with a full head of black hair, which he wore short, in a military-cut style. He glanced at Tara, a look of relief present on his face, as if he were glad to see her. The young man was slightly pale, an effect which Samantha attributed to the cold weather. He stepped forward, holding out a hand to welcome her. "Hello, my name is Hosea. It's nice to meet you," he greeted them. "I'm Samantha, Josh's wife. You spoke with my husband on the radio. Yeah, I'm a trained apothecary and surgeon," Samantha stated. She shook Hosea's hand. "Where's the rest of your patrol? We'd assumed you'd bring more than a single man," she inquired. Hosea scratched his head, giving her a nervous glance. "That'd actually been the plan at first, miss. However, we were bushwhacked by this group of men. They shot at us and then fled into the woods when we returned fire. I had 3 partners with me to ensure that you arrived safely in Strawberry," informed Hosea. Samantha and Josh exchanged a glance, each of them thinking the same thing. Were these men dressed in all black tactical gear, with white symbols painted on their breastplates?" inquired Josh. Hosea nodded vigorously, his eyes widening. "Yes. Have you encountered these marauders before?" he asked. "Yeah, they attacked our lodge last night. It's actually the reason why we had to leave there." "Yeah, we contacted you not long after it happened," replied Samantha. She looked past Hosea then, at the thick snowy forest which surrounded them. She could just make out the distant sound of gunfire as the patrol fought with Michael's men. Josh unslung his father's shotgun from off his shoulder. It was an old gun, a Winchester model, 1897, one that had been used in the Second World War. "Well, I can help with your patrol. We've dealt with these men before," he stated. "Right, in that case, you should follow me. Suppose your wife can stay with the horses," Hosea replied. Samantha shook her head, though. "No, Jess and I will stick to the cover of the forest. We can watch from a distance," she informed him. Hosea reached down to his belt, drawing a walkie-talkie, which he offered to Samantha. "I suppose this might help. You can stay in contact with us using this," he stated. Samantha took the walkie-talkie from him, and then she motioned for Jess to join her. Slipping into the forest and drawing her sword, listening to the distant sound of gunfire as the fight continued. She and Jess crept silently through the forest, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. "We need to get within sight of the patrol," whispered Samantha, and Jess nodded. still have some ammunition left," she replied, unslinging the rifle from her shoulder. She and Samantha crept toward the sound of the gunshots. Thankfully, it seemed that no infected had heard all the racket which these men were making, as none of them had come swarming in, as they had done on Black Mountain. Samantha sighed and shook her head in disbelief over the fact that Michael's men had proven to be such a nuisance. Oh, she now regretted not having finished him off when she had the chance. She and Jess took cover behind a wide pair of oak trees in a place where they had a good visual of the unfolding fight. Samantha could see through the trees to a distant red farmhouse where Michael's men and the patrol were in a pitched battle. The patrol sent to help them was now crouched behind a fence, exchanging fire with a group of Michael's men who'd taken up positions in the farmhouse, shooting at the patrol outside through its windows. One of Michael's men had taken position in the barn loft, using it as an elevated platform from which he rained down fire on their allies. "Jess, use your scope. Take out that man up in the hayloft," whispered Samantha. Jess then took aim at the man's head, taking a deep breath in before pulling the trigger. The bullet found its mark, hitting the man in the forehead. He fell from the loft, hitting the ground beneath him hard. "Oh, good shot," whispered Samantha, and she then drew her walkie-talkie. "Right, your men are pinned down behind an old fence. Jess just shot one of the men attacking them. We need you to help us with the rest," she informed. "Right, we're in position, moving to attack the farmhouse. Cover us," Josh replied. Samantha and Jess watched from a distance as Josh and Hosea came up from behind the farmhouse, flanking Michael's men. A blast from Josh's shotgun broke down the barn's back door. He and Hosea then swarmed inside, firing wildly. Samantha was unsure of what was happening inside. All she could hear was the blast from Josh's shotgun, followed by several bursts of machine gun fire, as he surprised the men inside. Meanwhile, outside the barn, the patrol had been crouching behind the fence. All stood up, looking towards the barn with their weapons raised. They seemed to be relieved that someone had arrived to help them. They slowly advanced towards the farmhouse, keeping their guns raised as they walked. "Josh, what's going on? Did you and Hosea deal with Michael's men?" inquired Samantha. She waited for a moment as the radio produced nothing but static. In the distance, the gunfire came to a stop after a final blast from Josh's shotgun. By this time, the three men had surrounded the front of the barn. They waited outside, hoping that Hosea would emerge. "Everything's fine. Yeah, we finished off Michael's men. Oh, you and Jess need to come see this. We found something in the basement," informed Josh. Hosea stepped out from the barn, shouting to his men to lower their weapons. They did as they were told, standing down, waiting to meet the healer which they had been sent to retrieve. Samantha sighed with relief upon knowing that Josh was unharmed. She emerged from behind the oak tree, walking slowly through the forest as Josh and Hosea searched the barn for supplies. She sheathed her sword, crunching through the snow as she walked. The guns had finally fallen silent, meaning that they were no longer in danger of attracting the infected. Jess followed her, holding her rifle. "Hey, we should leave this area. Those gunshots could have drawn in the infected," she whispered, glancing out into the forest, watching for any sign of infected. "Oh, we'll be done soon enough. These men will take us to Strawberry. We'll be safe there," Samantha replied. She and Jess then stepped over a large stump, the snow crunching beneath their feet. A cool wind blew through the air, rustling the tree branches above their heads, causing small amounts of snow to fall onto the ground. Soon both of them emerged from the forest, stepping out to meet the patrol, who'd all turned to look at them, regarding Samantha with some amount of interest. The patrol all carried weapons, and wearing dark winter clothing, they stood clustered outside the barn with Hosea, waiting for Josh to come back out. Upon seeing Samantha, Hosea gave her a jovial wave. "Oh, hello. Thank you for your help. Your husband and I found a very welcome surprise in the farmhouse. He'd like you to take a look for yourself," stated Hosea. Samantha gave him a polite nod, walking past him. She pushed open the double doors which led to the barn. Inside, she was pleasantly surprised to find several horses, which had been stabled in the barn. The horses looked very healthy, well fed and well groomed, making Samantha certain that the barn could not have been abandoned for long. The interior of the barn was fairly ordinary, looking like any other barn Samantha had ever seen. Its floor was covered by hay, with several large hay bales stacked in the corner, next to an old pitchfork. She glanced around at the various animal stalls around her, looking from horse to horse. One caught her eye, a brown and white Norfolk roadster, a massive mare, one which looked at Samantha with kind eyes. As she walked by, Samantha gently patted the mare's snout, listening as it snorted in response. Up ahead of her, Samantha noted the doors to a basement, which hung wide open. "Josh," she called, wondering what he wanted her to see. Josh stepped out of the basement, waving Jess and Samantha over. "Ah, you have to see this," he called. Samantha made her way over to him, walking across the straw-covered floor. She made her way down to the stairs that led to the basement. Hearing them creak loudly beneath she and Jess's combined weight. Upon reaching the bottom of the stairs, Samantha was shocked to find that the basement was quite large, being nearly as big as the barn above it. Upon examining her surroundings, she made a startling discovery. The basement was filled with flowering cannabis plants, which were lit by blue UV floodlights. Jess and Samantha exchanged glances, surprised and delighted at what they'd found. "Whoa! How on earth did you find this, Josh?" inquired Samantha. She and Jess then walked across the basement, looking at the plants around them. Above their head was a sprinkler system, which watered the plants, and the air in the basement was warm and moist, the air thick with the strong scent of the cannabis. While Hosea was sweeping the barn, I searched the basement. I was just as shocked as you are to find all this here. When I found all this, I just had to show it to you. Whoever had been living on this old farm had a serious growing operation. I don't know who they were, but they clearly knew what they were doing," he replied. "Well, obviously, Josh, this is great. We could trade some of this for supplies if we had to, or use it for medical purposes," stated Samantha. "Did you see those horses up there?" "Saw at least 5 or 6. Plus the 4 the patrol rode in on," informed Jess. "Yeah, Hosea said that we could each pick a horse, and the rest will go to the community at Strawberry," Josh replied. Samantha gave him an excited look. "You mean they're just going to give us a horse?" she replied, in disbelief, and Josh nodded. "Yeah, they're very keen on convincing you to stay, Samantha. Their only doctor died a few days ago, torn apart by a pack of infected," he informed her. Samantha walked across the basement, picking up a small glass jar, which sat in the corner atop a metal tray. The jar contained several rolled joints, which had been left behind by the barn's original owners. She picked up the jar, holding it out to show Josh. "Look what I found. Maybe we can sample some of this latest batch," she suggested, twisting off the lid and taking out one of the joints. Josh walked over to Samantha, producing a lighter from his pocket. "Yeah, that sounds great. After all, if we're going to be trading this, then we should have some idea what its quality is," he replied. Josh struck his lighter, igniting the tip of the joint. Samantha took the first drag, inhaling deeply. The weed was strong, and after only a few puffs it began to take effect. Samantha felt her body begin to relax, her breathing deepening. Sighing, she lowered the joint from her lips. Nodding slowly, she then passed it to Josh, who gave it a try himself. "This is good stuff. We'll be able to trade it for quite a lot," he stated, passing the joint to Jess. When they'd finished up in the basement, Samantha selected one of the horses, a massive brown and white Norfolk roadster, the same one she'd seen earlier. Saddling it with a very nice saddle, one she'd found in the barn. Well, there were several saddles in the barn, most of them just as nice as Samantha's. Both Josh and Jess took one for their own horses. Once all 3 of their horses were saddled and ready, Samantha and Josh rode out of the barn, trotting forward at a slow pace. Hosea had agreed to drive their van to Strawberry, to park it there. Well, they had little use for it, as gas was now hard to come by. Samantha rode slowly up the road, with Josh and Jess on either side of her. The ride was a pleasant and quiet one, in which she enjoyed the scenery, talking quietly with Josh and Jess. After riding a short while, they reached the gates of Strawberry, which were massive, crafted from solid black iron. "Ah, we're here. I'm glad. This town seems as if it might be safe. Well, that gate certainly looks sturdy," Josh commented. He rode closer to the gate, taking a sweeping glance around. The whole town was surrounded by a wall with the Rocky Mountains at its back, giving it good protection against the infected. The wall was manned by several sentries, who walked along the top of it looking down at the road below, with bows and rifles in hand. As they drew closer to the wall, both Samantha and Josh noticed a single guard, one who stood outside the wall. He was dressed in a heavy coat and had a pair of hunter's pants. Upon seeing Josh, the guard rushed forward to meet them, calling out in a voice very familiar to both Samantha and Josh. "Christopher!" they shouted, happy to see their old friend once again. Part 2. The heavy iron gates of Strawberry swung open with a loud creak, their rusted hinges protesting their use, as if the doors themselves were hesitant to open. "Oh, those doors could use a bit of oil," commented Josh. He rode to the right of Samantha, keeping pace with her the whole way to Strawberry. Samantha's horse snorted, raising her head up to sniff the air, shaking it from side to side as she let out a nervous neigh. She'd smelt something which didn't sit well with her. Perhaps the scent of a pack of infected, which could have been carried on the wind from some ways off. Samantha patted her horse's side, trying to calm her. "Shh, easy girl," she whispered. The horse snorted, stamping one foot loudly. She'd proven to be a very calm mount, one that Samantha was already beginning to grow very fond of. She had a dappled white and brown coat, one that was still clean and shiny. Beside Samantha, Christopher was straining with the effort it took to open the gates, which were very heavy. "Hey, did you ever think of a name for that horse?" inquired Jess, who rode behind her. Jess's horse was a solid white Arabian, one that she'd named Frost. The horses seemed to be quite friendly, getting along well with Jess. It was smaller than Samantha's and a bit more skittish. Samantha shook her head. "No, I thought of a few, but have yet to settle on one," she replied. "Well, I think I'm going to name mine Gunpowder, like the horse from that Halloween story," informed Josh. His horse was a dark shade of grey, with a single patch of white on its face. "Oh, you mean the legend of Sleepy Hollow?" inquired Samantha, and Josh nodded. "Yep. Also, that would make a great name for a horse," he replied. Upon riding into town, Samantha was greeted by a small crowd, which had gathered near the gate, eager to meet the new arrivals. There were about 24 people in total, mostly younger people, who looked to be around the same age as Samantha. Some of them had lived in Strawberry since before the pandemic, and others had been discovered by Christopher's patrol and brought back to town. All of them either wore camo pants or long tunics with hoods. The people of Strawberry seemed quite bizarre to Samantha, making her wonder just where they'd come from. Most of them carried weapons with them, such as knives and hatchets, always ready for a sudden attack from the infected. Samantha waved at the crowd. "Hello," she greeted, and the people examined her with interest, looking she and Josh up and down. "Are you the new physician?" inquired a young woman, one who stood at the front of the crowd. The woman had long brown hair, which was worn up in a bun. She wore a long grey tunic, one that blew gently in the wind, which blew from further up the mountain. Samantha nodded at her. The woman seemed to be oddly familiar, as if Samantha had seen her before. A cool gust of wind blew through the air, making Samantha shiver. Well, it was already late in the afternoon, and the sun was beginning to take on an orange hue as it sank lower into the sky. Samantha cleared her throat before answering the woman. "Yeah, I'm here to provide medical aid to this settlement. I was told you were in need of a healer," she replied. It's fortunate that you arrived. Our last healer died during the supply raid. We've been trying to replace him for days, informed one of the men dressed in camo. Well, I'm here now, so if any of you require aid, please inform me. I'll be glad to help you, replied Samantha. Behind her, Christopher slammed the door to the town closed, securing it with a thick, dead bolt. He then stepped forward to meet the crowd, standing beside Josh. This is my friend Josh and his wife Samantha. They'll be staying with us from now on, he announced. The crowd seemed to accept this, shuffling off to do whatever tasks were required for the day. This left Samantha and Josh to explore the rest of the town. She glanced around at Strawberry. It was larger than she'd expected. The town consisted of a wide collection of both homes and businesses. There was a grocery store, a medical clinic, a bar, and a library, all of which were clustered around a larger brick building in the center of town, which would once be in its city hall. A lot of homes in the town were unused, waiting to be filled by new arrivals. Behind Samantha were stables for their horses. The warm smell of several burning fireplaces filled the air, giving Strawberry a warm and welcoming scent. There was a house nearby them, an old log cabin, one on whose porch an elderly woman sat, rocking back and forth on an antique chair. As she knitted a sweater, she glanced over at the new arrivals with an air of disinterest, paying them little attention. Samantha's horse grunted softly, leaning down to eat a clump of grass, which it began to chew noisily. A soft pat on Samantha's leg made her glance to her right, where Christopher stood waiting. We can take your horses to the stables. I'd like to show you the rest of the town, informed Christopher, and Samantha nodded, climbing down from her horse and handing her reins to one of Christopher's men. Hey, be good, Creeperoni, she whispered, patting the horse's muzzle. Creeperoni grunted in response, trotting away with Christopher's men, who were leading her by her reins. So, that's the name you've chosen? Creeperoni? Is that supposed to be a little spooky plate of mac and cheese? Laughed Josh. Samantha shrugged. Yeah, something like that. Well, it's just a random name I came up with. I thought of naming her Spooky Pasta, but that sounded silly, she replied. She followed he and Christopher in the direction of the town. We keep an armory at City Hall. If either of you need weapons or ammunition, then head there, Christopher informed them. Good to know, Josh replied, and he quickly checked to see how many shotgun shells he had left, finding that he would soon need more. Samantha, we have a very well-stocked medical clinic with a plentiful herb garden. I hope this can help you get started on your work. Having a trained healer will certainly improve morale, commented Christopher. Thank you. Josh and I are very happy to be here, and I'm ready to begin my work as soon as possible, informed Samantha. Christopher nodded at her, smiling widely. Excellent news. We've actually had a few complaints today regarding sickness. Nothing serious, just colds and the like, he explained. Well, I can definitely prepare some remedies for that. I know of a few common herbs which might help, replied Samantha. Christopher then motioned to one of the men accompanying him. John, could you please escort our new physician to the clinic, as well as getting her whatever she needs, he directed. Samantha turned to Jess, who was trailing behind she and Josh. You should come with me, she stated. Jess seemed surprised at her offer, and she gave Samantha a look of surprise. Me? I don't know anything about medicine or herbs, she replied, shaking her head. No, you don't. However, you can always learn. You need to contribute something of value to this group, and I've got a good feeling about you, Samantha replied. Jess thought for a moment, then slowly nodded in agreement. Well, that actually sounds really interesting, she replied. Samantha was about to reply to Jess when a sudden commotion distracted her. One of the patrols which had gone out earlier in the morning had returned, arriving at the front gate, and they were shouting to be let in, sounding as if they were in some sort of distress. Hold on just a moment. Let me go unlatch the gate, Christopher shouted, making his way swiftly over with Josh in tow. Outside, the sound of gunshots rang out as the patrol began shooting at something. No, hold your fire. You'll draw in the infected, Christopher shouted, yanking back the deadbolt which held the door closed. The doors then burst open with a loud clatter as a man bolted through, dressed in camouflage pants and a dark-coloured shirt. He was covered in blood, with a shotgun in his arms, and behind him several other people rushed in, the rest of his patrol. Some of them appeared to be injured, limping and bleeding from multiple cuts. "We got ambushed out on the road. Some group dressed all in black with this weird symbol on their chests. They just hit us as we were arriving home. They killed Thomas, shot him in the back, and then the rest of us ran for it," stammered the man, panting as he spoke. Samantha quickly made her way over to the people, checking in the bag which she wore over her shoulder. "I'm a physician. Which one of you's hurt?" she inquired, glancing at several members of the patrol. All of the members were young men, looking to be in their early to mid-20s. One of them was bleeding from a wound on his arm. Most of them were dirty, with at least a few scrapes and bruises. "None of us are too badly hurt. Took a graze wound, and Charlie banged his knee up pretty bad when he tripped, but that's about it," informed the man who was bleeding from the graze wound. Samantha walked over to the man, pulling a wad of bandages from her bag, along with a bottle of herbal disinfectant. "Hold still. I need to get something over this before it gets infected," she said, applying a bit of the disinfectant to the bandages. She then carefully bandaged the arm, wrapping the gauze around it. This seemed to slow the bleeding to a less worrying level. The arm would of course need more treatment later, but the bandages would have to suffice for the time being. "Right there. That should at least stop any infection," whispered Samantha. Gunshots rang out from behind her as the men guarding the front gate exchanged fire with a group of men who'd emerged from the tree line. A few of them were hit in the head or chest, killing them quickly, and the rest took cover behind the wall, trying to get any shot they could. "Who on earth is that? Why are they attacking us?" inquired the man whose arm Samantha had just bandaged. "I think those men might have been sent by Michael. I recall hearing you mention that they'd got white symbols on their chests." The man nodded. "Yeah, they had those symbols on their chests. Some sort of circle. Never got a clear look. We were all running from him," the man informed her. Samantha nodded. "Josh and I have dealt with these men before. This isn't the first time they've attacked," she sighed, the booming blast of a shotgun filling the air as Samantha ushered the rest of the patrol towards the town. Josh had climbed up onto the wall, aiming his shotgun down at the attackers. There were several of them, firing at the gate from the tree line. So Josh unloaded in their direction, pumping his shotgun as he fired, peppering the trees with buckshot. This made the men dive for cover to avoid the onslaught, giving Christopher's men time to aim with their rifles. As one of the black-clad men peered out from behind a tree, a bullet passed through his head, fired from a hunting rifle. The rest of the men then sprang out, trying to get a shot off on Josh. Two of them died right away, their body armor doing little to stop the high-powered rifle rounds which the patrols fired. The survivors then fled, sprinting away from the scene. Josh slowly lowered the shotgun, surveying the tree line with alert eyes. "Are these the same men who attacked the lodge up on Black Mountain?" inquired Christopher. "Yeah, Michael must have sent more after us. Don't know how they found this place, but we need to stop him," informed Josh. "Where is Michael hiding?" Christopher asked. "He should be in an abandoned sanatorium nearby the lodge on Black Mountain. I have no idea how many men he has, but he's lost several in the last few days, so he may be running low." Christopher nodded. "At some point we're going to have to deal with him," he stated, and Josh nodded. Samantha and Jess had reached the clinic in town, and inside they found ample supplies with which to treat the men's wounds. None of them were that badly injured, just as they'd said. Most would be able to take care of themselves, though Samantha did give them a bit of salve for their cuts, to keep them from getting infected. The graze on the arm would heal, though it would leave a scar. The more pressing matter would be Michael and his men, who had followed she and Josh to Strawberry after their little skirmish up on Black Mountain. Outside, the gunfire had stopped now, Michael's men having broken off their attack after being met with unexpected resistance. The clinic had proven to be much better than Samantha had expected it to be. It was very well stocked for such a small town, having a good store of gauze and bandages, as well as a few bottles of antibiotics, which had been left behind by the previous physician. Samantha stood in the back room, mixing together a few tinctures with Jess by her side, watching her work. A collection of glass bottles were laying out across a steel table, alongside jars of ground herbs which had been picked from the nearby garden. The mixture which she made was very effective against cold and flu symptoms, which would prove to help the patients which Christopher had mentioned earlier. Right, you'll need a few drops of peppermint oil, combined with a bit of fresh garlic and honey. This should help with any cold or flu symptoms, as well as aid a sore throat, Samantha informed Jess, mixing the ingredients inside one of the bottles. Well, how much should I use? Inquired Jess. Now, peppermint essential oil is very strong and will need to be diluted with a carrier oil. A few drops will be all you need. Right, combine this with a tablespoon of honey and a few teaspoons of fresh garlic. This should make enough for at least a few doses, which are to be taken by mouth twice a day until the symptoms are gone, she explained. She then stood back from the table, pulling Jess closer to her. Here, try making one on your own, she suggested. She then watched Jess, guiding her when necessary. Jess had a natural gift for the work of an apothecary. She managed to get the mixture correct the first time, without wasting any ingredients. Samantha had expected her to spill the mixture upon first try, as this was the most common mistake for beginners. She smiled, watching as she finished the first bottle, screwing on the cap and setting it down on the table. See, I knew you'd be good at this. I have good intuition, whispered Samantha, and she rested a hand on Jess's shoulder. Good work. Now, make 2 more just like the first. Then we should go see Christopher, she directed. Oh, thank you. You'll have to show me what you did earlier with the gauze, Jess replied, and Samantha nodded, taking a seat in a rolling chair behind Jess. Of course, all in good time. You'll need to learn the basics first, like how to grow the herbs which we'll need, and harvest them in the field. I know a few places where some herbs will grow wild, and I'll be glad to show you soon, Samantha offered. Jess finished a second bottle. Yeah, sounds nice. Are they close by? Samantha shook her head. We'll have to ride a few hours away from town to get them. They grow further up in the mountains, she said. She then swiveled around in her chair, looking out at the rest of the clinic, which was now empty. She and Jess would have it ready to do business in the next day. It wouldn't take very much, as its previous owner had left it in good condition. The clinic was already set up for the most part, with mixtures and oils stocking its shelves. Well, the place was slightly dusty and would need to be vacuumed, but other than that it was in working order. Right, I finished the last one. I think we're ready, stated Jess. Good. Give the doses to me, replied Samantha. And a few minutes later, both Jess and Samantha emerged from the clinic to find Josh and Christopher talking by the front gate. Upon noticing them coming in their direction, he and Christopher stopped talking, making their way over to them. These attacks are getting worse. We'll need to do something about Michael, announced Josh. Yeah, since we know where he is, and we'll have to take care of him unless we want more of these attacks. Yeah, he killed at least 3 people today, Christopher informed him. I wish I could have done more, but from what I saw, their wounds were fatal. I was preoccupied with treating the patrol which had just arrived, replied Samantha. Christopher nodded. Don't feel bad. You did what you could, and that's all we ask. After that, the rest of the day went by quickly. Samantha and Jess gave the remedies to those who'd requested them. They then had dinner with Josh and Christopher. The meal was good, a bowl of hearty beef stew, which Samantha thought was quite good after such a long day. She'd have to teach Jess quite a lot, but she was excited to do so. Part 3. Samantha glanced out at the deep evergreen forest that surrounded her. She could hear the sound of birdsong carried on the wind as they searched for worms among the melted snow on the ground. Wind blew through the trees, causing them to rustle gently. It was slightly warmer that day, though more cold weather would soon arrive, as there was still at least a month of winter left. The cold season lasted for quite a while, in the northernmost reaches of British Columbia. Samantha had grown used to this in the years she'd lived in those regions. She glanced beside her at Jess, who decided to come with her, in order to learn how to pick herbs in the wild. This was a skill she'd need if she were to one day become a healer. So far, Samantha felt confident that they'd chosen the correct day to go herb picking. They had clear skies, giving them plenty of light to navigate the forest. She doubted that she and Jess would be able to gather very many herbs so early in the season, as most of them would begin to grow in the spring. However, she was still eager to show her what she could, as Jess had been asking her about wild herbs in the area. "How much deeper do we need to go?" inquired Jess. She rode beside Samantha, trotting slowly along. "Not all that much further. Soon we should be coming upon an abandoned school bus. It's been used as a landmark for hunters since before the outbreak," informed Samantha. She then turned left, guiding her horse onto an old trail, one that broke off from the main path. The trail hadn't been used for some time. If Samantha hadn't known it was there, then she would likely never have noticed it. Her grandmother had shown her the trail several summers before during a hiking trip. "Come with me and stay close. They could be infected nearby," she said. She patted her side where her bastard sword hung, always within reach should she require it. She rode ahead of Jess, ducking beneath the low-hanging branches of a tree. "Watch your head as you go," she called over her shoulder, hoping to warn Jess. "Hey, have you collected herbs like this before?" Jess inquired, and Samantha nodded. "Yeah, a few times, actually. My grandmother was always into herbal medicine. She taught me quite a lot when I was young. I've been doing this a long time." Samantha rode past a section of maple trees, looking up into their branches to see squirrels running about. The squirrels were plump and round, making Samantha wonder if they might be worth shooting. She'd brought a small game rifle along with her, one that Christopher had given her. She carried it just in case she and Jess were to camp out overnight, so that they'd have a way to feed themselves. After a moment of indecision, she decided to let them go. Samantha didn't plan on staying the night in the forest. She wanted to be back in Strawberry by nightfall, when the temperatures would dip back down. The path wound through the thick forest, twisting around the trunks of trees. Jess followed behind Samantha, keeping her eyes and ears open for infected, and soon they emerged from the path. Riding out into a clearing, the bus which Samantha had mentioned was sitting there in the middle of the clearing. It only had a few brown patches of grass growing, as it was too cold for any real growth to have begun. The old bus was filthy and badly rusted, caked with frozen mud, its windows so streaked with dirt and ice that it was impossible to see through them. A white rabbit glanced up to see the two of them arriving, darting away into the forest. "This is the place," announced Samantha, and she dismounted Creeperoni. Stepping down and tethering her to a tree, Jess rode up beside her, dismounting Frost and tethering her next to Creeperoni. "What are we looking for?" she asked, glancing around the clearing. There are a few patches of wild peppermint which grow in the forest nearby. They're easy to harvest, so shouldn't prove to be too difficult for your first time," explained Samantha. Jess nodded, taking her rifle, which she carried with her in her saddle, making sure that it was loaded. You really should try to avoid shooting that if it's all possible. I don't know if there are infected here, but any shots will bring them running." Jess nodded. "I know, it's for emergencies only," she replied. She carried the rifle slung over her back, being sure still to keep it close by. After all, they were in bear country, and it's better to be safe than sorry. Samantha stepped over a fallen log, making her way deeper into the forest, causing the chipmunks in the branches above her to dive for cover, chattering loudly at her disturbance. She glanced over her shoulder, to be certain that Jess was still behind her. "Okay, in the summer the herbs here are partially hidden by grass and weeds. Hopefully that should keep anyone from stealing them," informed Samantha. "How did you even know they were here to begin with?" Jess asked. "This is one of the places my grandmother took me. I was shocked to find that the herbs were still intact, even after all these years. I'd expected them to have been eaten or picked by now." Samantha then paused beneath the branches of an old oak tree. Dropping to one knee, "Here, take a look at this," she called, motioning for Jess to join her. A small cluster of peppermint plants had already begun to bloom. It was rare to see them bloom so early in the year, and Samantha was surprised they'd found any at all. She reached into a pouch hanging from her side, taking out a small glass vial along with a tiny pair of scissors. The vial already had a few leaves in it, left over from the last time she'd gathered samples from the plants. Now the key is to leave at least a few of the leaves behind. This way the plant won't die, and you can keep harvesting from it for a long time, explained Samantha. Jess knelt down beside her. Interesting. So I should only take a few leaves from each plant? She asked, and Samantha nodded. Yeah. Watch. I'll show you how I've always done it, snipping a few leaves from one of the peppermint plants. The leaves of the plant were often used to make tea, which had proven to be very effective against colds. She placed the leaves inside the vial, trying her best not to drop any. Jess watched as she harvested the leaves, paying close attention to how it was done. Once finished, Samantha handed Jess the scissors, moving aside to allow her access to the plants. You should try and gather a few leaves on your own, she said, and Jess took both the vial and the scissors from her. She then snipped off a few of the leaves from one of the plants, doing it the same way Samantha had, trying to be as gentle as she could. It was her first time harvesting herbs on her own, and she wanted to please Samantha, who had been teaching her about herbal medicine since she'd arrived at Strawberry. And so far Jess had taken well to it, being able to mix together a few basic remedies. She and Samantha got along really well, much better than Jess had ever expected they would. Samantha was a good teacher, and Jess was eager to learn. She'd grown very interested in herbal medicine, a subject which she'd known nothing about in her old life. Jess harvested leaves from the remaining plants, being careful not to strip them of all of the leaves, just as Samantha had instructed her. Once she'd finished, she lowered her scissors, snapping the lid back on the vial. She then felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning her head to find Samantha standing behind her, looking down with approval. Excellent work. I'm glad to see you've been paying attention. Jess handed her back the vial and the scissors. Rising to her feet, she brushed herself off, glancing over at Samantha, who'd slid the vial back into her satchel. Okay, what now? Asked Jess. Samantha shrugged. Well, there really aren't any other herbs we can pick. It's far too early in the season. We'll have to come back in the spring. Well, I suppose if you're looking for something else to do, we could go and check some of the snares which Christopher set. There, down along the river. It's not far from here. Jess nodded. That sounds nice enough. Maybe we can catch a nice plump rabbit. Samantha led Jess back to their horses, which were still tethered by the rusted old bus, contentedly eating grass. Upon seeing their riders approach, the horses raised their heads, neighing softly. Samantha approached Creeperoni, patting her on the head and taking the collapsible fishing pole which hung from her saddle. Well, if the traps are empty, I could try and catch us a fish, she declared. As they made their way deeper into the forest, Samantha thought back on the events which had occurred earlier in that morning. In truth, picking herbs had been only one of the reasons she'd left town. She'd awoken that morning in great spirits, eager for her outing with Jess. Joss had been, distant with her, a fact which concerned her. Ever since her sister had died, Samantha had noticed a definite change in him. It hadn't been that noticeable at first, something far too subtle for her to pick up on. It wasn't until after the night at the lodge, in which they'd found Jessica, that Samantha had become concerned. Josh now had a silent anger, one that followed him everywhere he went. He seemed to blame Jess for what had happened to his sisters, though he acted nice when she was looking. No, Samantha hadn't failed to see the looks of anger which he gave her when her back was turned. He'd always had mental issues, which his therapist had given him medication for. She thought he had it under control, but Samantha now feared that she'd been wrong. A light touch on her arm made her turn her head. Jess walked beside her, looking over at her with concern. You're thinking of what happened before we left, aren't you? She inquired, and Samantha nodded in response. Yeah, I thought so. You seem to have gone awfully quiet. Yeah, Josh wasn't happy to hear that I was going out today, especially not with you, sighed Samantha. He wants to go after Michael. I heard him say as much. Oh, I can't just leave Strawberry, though. I'm the only healer we have now. What happens to this town if I don't come back? Well, for all I know, we could be the only survivors." "Yeah, we very well could be," said Jess. "What if we're some of the last uninfected people left? We can't afford to waste lives on some revenge fantasy. Not at a time like this." "Yeah, I know you're right. I saw what was up on Black Mountain. Those Wendigo could have killed us," Samantha recalled. "Don't know why he thinks he has to drag you along. And if he's so eager to go and get revenge, let him go," said Jess. "I should. I have to, but I can't leave this town behind. Not when we don't even know if we're the only ones left." By now, Samantha and Jess had reached the river, standing on its sandy shores, and looking down at its rushing, white-capped waters as they flow by, churning and crashing over the smooth stones. The river fed into a much larger lake downstream of them. Samantha and Jess walked along the shore for a short distance, looking at the various small shells which had collected in the sand. "How big are these traps? What sort of animals can they catch?" Jess inquired. "Small game for the most part. Foxes, beavers, raccoons, those sort of things. They're not large traps like the sort you could catch a bear with," explained Samantha. She then paused, bending down beside the water. One of the traps sat below her, attached to a rock on the shore. A river otter was caught in the trap, dying in its attempt to get at the bait, a small fish which she and Josh had caught a few days before. "Right, here's one of the traps. As you can see, it's quite small. Some we used to catch beavers and river otters," explained Samantha. And she pulled the trap from the water, removing the carcass from its steel jaws. "This should make a very fine pelt. Our tailor could use this for crafting," she stated, attaching the dead otter to her belt. Samantha then turned back towards the forest. Looking through the sea of trees, a sudden feeling of unease overcame her, as she realized just how silent it had become. Then she froze where she was, listening intently for the sounds of the forest. The birds had stopped chirping all at once, as if something had scared them into stopping. Jess noticed it too. "What on earth happened to the birds? I can't hear them," she whispered, casting a nervous glance around. "Oh, something must be out there. When the animals go silent, it's because something they fear is close by. It could be infected," replied Samantha. She looked from tree to tree, waiting to see if anything would step into view. That was when a loud shriek sounded from further back in the forest, sending a chill down both their spines. It was like nothing either of them had ever heard before, animalistic and primal, with an almost human-like quality to it. "What's that?" gasped Jess, quickly taking her rifle off her shoulder. "I don't know, but we should leave now," replied Samantha. She began to walk back along the shore, trying her best to be quiet, her heart racing as she wondered just what had made that terrible noise, and if it was still close by, perhaps even watching them. They both moved as fast as they could, creeping silently along the shore, their heads on a swivel. They could hear something running loudly through the forest, keeping pace with them, and Samantha felt a growing sense of dread. Whatever was following them was moving far too fast to be an infected person, meaning that it must be some sort of animal. Soon she and Jess reached a spot where they could see the old bus, where they'd left their horses. Oh, if only they could reach them, then they'd be able to escape. At least that was what Samantha hoped. The trees ahead of them rustled as the Wendigo leapt into view, leaping atop the old bus, glaring down at them with hungry, pale blue eyes. Samantha froze in her tracks, looking up at the Wendigo which blocked their progress. It was missing an arm, which seemed to have been severed at the elbow. "How is that thing here? I thought they were unable to leave Black Mountain," exclaimed Jess. Samantha drew her sword. "Don't panic. It hasn't seen us yet. We can still try and sneak past it," she whispered. The Wendigo sniffed the air, searching for them with its pale, lifeless eyes. Neither of them dared to move more than a few inches as they prepared to slip by the creature. A distant sound made Samantha glance over to her right, where something was charging out of the forest. The trees nearby the bus began to shake as someone screamed. Charging into view, a man bolted out of the forest, panting wildly. He wore the torn uniform of one of Michael's soldiers, with a white symbol representing the sun painted on his chest. The man had been bidden during their fight on Black Mountain, having turned later that same night. "Infected!" shouted Jess. She then raised her rifle to shoot the charging infected, only to be stopped by Samantha, who pushed the barrel of her gun back down. "Wait, look," she whispered, pointing up at the Wendigo. Jess glanced back to where she was pointing. The Wendigo had also noticed the infected, glaring down at it with his angry, glowing eyes. Then, with a predatory growl, the Wendigo leapt from the top of the bus, landing just behind the infected man. The infected whirled around to face the Wendigo, only to have the pale creature leap onto him, while he struggled madly, biting and clawing at the Wendigo. "Right, we have to move now, while they're distracted," shouted Samantha. She ran past the struggling Wendigo, hoping that the infected would keep it busy long enough for her and Jess to get on their horses. She could hear distant screams as more infected swarmed towards their location, drawn in by the cries of the Wendigo. She charged around the bus, hoping desperately that their horses would still be there. If they had gotten spooked and ran off, then she and Jess would not be in a good position. Upon rounding the side of the bus, Samantha was greeted by the sight of Creeperoni and Frost. Well, the two horses were terrified, bucking against their ropes, as they tried to flee from the Wendigo. Upon seeing Samantha, Creeperoni relaxed slightly, glancing over at her rider with fear. "Shh, easy girl," soothed Samantha. She gently patted the horse's neck, untying her reins from the branch she'd had them tethered to. A brief glance over her shoulder confirmed that Jess was right behind her. Jess stood next to Frost, with one hand on her reins, preparing to untie her from the tree. A roar from behind her made her spin around, raising her rifle. The Wendigo stood just a few paces from her, its glowing eyes fixed on her. The beast let out a growl, then reared back, leaping at Jess with its teeth barred in a snarl. She brought up the stock of her rifle, blocking the Wendigo's teeth from sinking into her neck. It knocked her to the ground then. "Jess!" Samantha shouted, dropping the reins of her horse and charging towards where the two were struggling. The Wendigo clawed at Jess, trying to chew through the stock of her rifle. She attempted to kick it away as she reached for a knife, hoping to be able to stab the creature in the eye. Samantha raised her sword, slashing the Wendigo across the back. "Get off!" she shouted, as it cried out in pain. Shoving Jess aside and turning its attention to her, it shoved Jess aside and turned its attention to her, but Samantha was ready for its attack. Surging forward, she swiped at its neck. The Wendigo threw itself backwards, narrowly avoiding the blow. It then circled Samantha, looking for an opportunity to jump on her as it had Jess. Then, a gunshot rang out, as Jess hit the Wendigo in the neck, knocking it back a few steps. It let out a cry of rage and surged forward. Samantha thrust at it with her sword, burying her blade between its eyes. "Jess, get on your horse!" shouted Samantha, wrenching the blade from its head. With a final scream, the Wendigo fell to the ground. Then a fiery spirit flew out of the Wendigo, flying off into the forest with a screech. Samantha turned away from it, wiped off the blade, and jumped onto her horse, giving it a kick in the side, urging it to flee the scene. Part 4. Samantha and Jess rode side by side down the dirt road to Strawberry, their horses' hooves thudding across the ground, kicking up dust behind them. They were still shaken after what had happened at the old bus. "That back there, that was impressive. What on earth were those things that came flying out of that dead Wendigo? They screeched like nothing I've ever heard," commented Jess. But Samantha just shook her head. "I don't know. If I had to take a wild guess, I'd say they were some sort of spirit. Well, maybe once their host dies, the spirits look for a new cannibal to possess," suggested Samantha. She and Jess rode on in the direction of Strawberry. Behind them, they could still hear the distant screams of the infected, who were still converging on the old, rusted-out bus. Well, I wish we could have gotten more supplies for all our troubles. I'll have to take you back in spring. We'll find more herbs to pick then, informed Samantha, and Jess nodded. Well, we have a fully stocked garden back home. I'm sure we can hold out till then. Samantha nodded. Yeah, we have to tell Josh what happened, though. The two rode on for a while, passing by the deep forest which surrounded them. And then the sounds of the forest resumed as they drew further away from the bus. Samantha glanced round nervously, expecting some Wendigo to attack her and Jess from the shadows, where she suspected them to lurk. Before long, she and Jess arrived at Strawberry's front gates, where a group of armed guards stood waiting. A quick glance around made them realize that something had gone wrong in their absence. A pile of bodies lay stacked to one side, each wearing the same black combat armor as Michael's men had. What's happened here? Where's Josh? Inquired Samantha. Inside, we captured a young woman, one who seemed to know Josh. When she last saw him, he was dragging her away for interrogation, answered one of the guards. Samantha and Jess exchanged a glance, each thinking the same thing. Hey, did you manage to catch what this woman's name was? What'd she look like? Jess inquired. Well, I never caught her name, but the woman had short black hair and was being very mouthy towards Josh, replied the guard. Oh, Emily. It had to be her. I know her, Samantha. This sounds so much like her, stated Jess. Where did Josh take her? Asked Samantha. I took her over to Christopher's house for interrogation. They've only been there a few minutes, replied the guard. Right, thank you, answered Samantha. She and Jess then rode past the guards and into Strawberry. Now, Christopher lives over there, close by the front gate, stated Samantha, pointing over to a cabin close to where they were. Both of them dismounted their horses. Right, let's go. We can't afford to let Josh kill her before we've gotten any good information out of her. Samantha then made her way swiftly over to the cabin, and already she could hear both Josh and Emily shouting inside in a very heated argument. Samantha rapped loudly on the door to Josh's cabin, and Christopher answered the door, peering out to see Samantha and Jess waiting on the doorstep. Oh, thank goodness you're here. Josh has been shouting at Emily for over an hour. Well, I managed to stop him from shooting her, but I'm not sure how much longer he'll be willing to listen, he stammered. Christopher ushered Jess and Samantha inside, closing the door behind them. Where are they? Inquired Samantha, looking at Christopher with urgency. He pointed over her shoulder, down a short corridor behind her. He's in the second bedroom on the right, he replied, and Samantha nodded, turning and making her way quickly to where Christopher had pointed. Jess trailed behind her, glancing at Christopher's living room as they passed by, where an old recliner sat in front of a flat-screen television, which played only static. The shouts of both Josh and Emily grew louder as Samantha neared the room which they were in. She opened the door, stepping into the room to find Josh standing in front of Emily, who was tied to a chair. He had his shotgun and was pointing it at her head. Tell me where she is, Josh shouted, placing the muzzle of the gun against her forehead. Josh, enough. We can't learn anything from her if she's dead, shouted Samantha, and she pushed the barrel of Josh's shotgun away from Emily. Josh glanced over at her, growling angrily. What is it? Don't tell me you're here to defend her too. Isn't it enough that you already took Jess's side? He inquired. Samantha glared at him. Jess has had nothing to do with what happened to Hannah and Beth. You know that. All she did was give Hannah a note. She hadn't even wanted to do that. Michael made her. It's not her fault. I thought she understood that. Josh then glared over at Emily. What should we do with her? He inquired. We need to find out what she knows. Well, you should allow Jess and I to have a word with her. At this rate, you're just going to end up hurting her. We can't get information out of a corpse, Josh, replied Samantha. Josh sighed. You know what? Fine. I'll leave. Give you time to play the good cop, but when she doesn't tell you anything, I'll be back, and we're doing it my way, he spat. Josh walked past Samantha, stepping out into the hallway and slamming the door behind him. This left Samantha and Jess alone with Emily. For a moment, Samantha and Emily stared at each other, neither of them saying a word. Jess walked over to Emily, untying her hands and allowing her to sit more comfortably in the chair. "What are you doing?" inquired Samantha. "Well, there's no sense in keeping her tied up. She knows she has no way out. We're going to need her to trust us if we're going to get anything out of her," Jess pointed out. Samantha nodded slowly. "I guess you're right," she muttered, sitting down in the chair across from Emily. "Hello, I'd say it was nice to see you, but I was never a good liar," stated Samantha. Emily snickered at her comment. "So, when are you going to kill me?" she inquired, glancing into Samantha's eyes. "Well, that depends on what you tell us. I could try and protect you, have you banished from here instead of killed, but that'll only happen if you're helpful. If not, then I can bring Josh back." Emily shook her head at that. No, there's no need for that. I can tell you a lot about Michael. If you're looking for him, then he's still at the abandoned sanatorium near Black Mountain," stated Emily. "He never left, even after our fight?" Jess asked. She and Samantha exchanged a surprised look. "No, he never left. The place is too valuable to his uncle for him to ever leave it. Look, there's something going on up there, something which I don't like at all," confided Emily. "What are you talking about?" asked Samantha. "Look, it all started the first day the outbreak reached Canada," Emily began, leaning back into her chair. Emily had been over at Michael's apartment on the day in question, having awoken in his bed that morning, groggy from the night before. She sat up with a groan, glancing around the dingy, cheap apartment with blurry eyes. "Michael, babe, where are you?" she'd moaned. Her head throbbed painfully, making it difficult for her to get up. Emily had no idea what time it was. All the windows in the apartment had been covered by heavy blinds. She picked her phone up from the bed beside the table, turning it on and shielding her eyes from its bright glare. "Oh, what on earth did I drink last night?" she'd muttered. It was just after 7:30 a.m., still early in the morning. Emily got out of bed, walking over to the bathroom and switching the light on. Upon glancing at her reflection in the mirror, Emily had recoiled, falling back against the wall. "What on earth?" she gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. The clothes she wore were covered in dried blood that couldn't have belonged to her. Emily struggled to catch her breath as she stumbled forward to the mirror, looking to see if she'd any cuts which could explain the blood. Well, she had none, as far as she could tell. Whose blood is this? She pondered, trying hard to remember what she'd done the night before. She could only remember bits and pieces. She'd arrived at the party late, greeting a few friends of hers, and after that everything was fuzzy. She could only vaguely recall a fight having occurred, though she was unsure what it had been over. Emily splashed water on her face, trying to calm herself. "Whose blood is this?" she'd muttered, her hands shaking as she tried to make sense of it all. Emily picked up her cell phone. She'd placed it down on the counter after seeing her bloody reflection. Upon opening her phone, Emily'd finally noticed just how many text messages she'd gotten from multiple contacts. She quickly began to scan through the messages. Her college had sent a message to her and all other students that classes were suspended for the time being, due to the unknown infection that was ravaging the US. Her parents had also texted her, informing her that they felt quite ill, that they were going to lie down for a while. Well, this worried Emily. She'd attempted to text her parents only to find that they wouldn't respond, not to her texts or calls. This was extremely odd for them, as they were normally very talkative. Emily growled with frustration, finally deciding that she would just text Michael to find out why she'd woken up covered in blood. "Where are you? What happened to me last night?" she texted, awaiting a reply. Much to her chagrin, she heard the sound of his phone ringing from within the apartment. Well, Emily growled with frustration, storming back into the apartment to find Michael's phone sitting on his nightstand, exactly where he'd left it. His wallet and keys were gone, indicating that he'd gone somewhere else. He can't have gone far, he wouldn't, not without his phone, she reasoned, pacing back and forth across the room. Emily walked over to the window. looking outside of their apartment. The city streets outside were deserted. Not a single living soul could be seen. No one walked down the street or came in or out of any of the nearby businesses. It was as if they'd all just vanished into thin air, leaving behind an empty city. Emily shook her head. "What's going on?" she muttered, stepping away from the window. A noise from behind her caused her to spin around. The door to their apartment swung open, revealing Michael. He ducked quickly into the apartment, closing the door behind him. Upon seeing Emily, Michael rushed over to where she stood, grabbing her by the shoulders and pulling her away from the window. "What are you doing? Get away from the windows," he shouted. Well, Emily was taken aback by Michael's reaction. He pushed past her, closing the blinds of the window. "We can't risk attracting those things here," he whispered, rounding on her. Emily cleared her throat, trying to stop her hands from shaking. "Michael, what happened last night? Why am I covered in blood?" Her voice was quivering. Michael gave her a look of annoyance mixed with surprise. "You don't remember last night?" he replied. Emily shook her head. "No, at least not all of it. I remember bits and pieces. Whose blood is this, and how did it get on me?" "Well, we were at a party last night. One of the guests was infected by that fungus from down south. He bit a couple of guys and even killed one girl. Then the cops shot him. The blood on your shirt came from the girl he killed. You were standing close by. How do you not remember?" inquired Michael. Well, Emily shook her head. "I barely remember last night. I was so drunk," she confessed. Michael growled with annoyance. "Right, we have to leave now. I don't know what's wrong with you or why you can't remember last night, but if you're not ready in 5 minutes, I'm leaving without you," he growled, storming away to pack his own things. Emily hurried after him. "Michael, wait. What on earth do you mean? Why are we leaving? We should stay here. I'm sure someone will come to help us. They have to," stammered Emily. She walked over to her side of the bed, looking around to see which of her things she'd brought to his apartment. Her purse laid on the bedside table where she'd tossed it the night before, after stumbling back to her boyfriend's apartment. She grabbed her purse and glanced round the room. Most of her things were still in her dorm room back in college. Michael walked past her, pulling a suitcase and backpack from his closet. He gave her an annoyed glance. "Why are you just standing there? Come on, Em, I wasn't joking earlier. Hurry up, I'm not waiting on you," he stated. "Michael, I don't have my things. I left everything back at my dorm," Emily groaned. But he ignored her, shoving clothes and food into his bags. "Then I guess you'll have to go without," he replied. "What? You're not going to take me back there?" She was glaring daggers at Michael now. He dropped his bag to the floor, walked over to Emily, and grabbed her arm roughly. "You have no idea what we're dealing with," he shouted, dragging her across the room to a window in the sitting room, one that looked out over the whole city. "Oh, let go of me! You're hurting my arm!" protested Emily. She looked out of the window then, her jaw dropping when she saw the state of the city of Vancouver. Everything was in chaos. Smoke rose in black plumes above the concrete high-rises. The pop and crackle of distant gunfire could be heard, as well as the whir of helicopter blades, as the military tried in vain to hold out the infection. The infection which had already ravaged America. Bodies lay rotting in the streets, having been torn apart by packs of the infected, who now ran wild throughout the whole city. Well, Emily was speechless. She'd known that it was getting far worse where they were. The virus had made it to their country, however their Prime Minister had assured them that it was under control. It was evident now that he had lied. The situation was far worse than he could have hoped to predict. "Right, seen enough?" inquired Michael. He snapped the blinds closed again, shutting out the chaotic world outside. "Right, come with me. We're leaving now," he commanded, thrusting Emily's purse into her chest. She took it from him, following behind him without a word. Michael left the dingy apartment behind, pulling a pistol from his waistband. "When we get out on the streets, don't fall behind. If you get grabbed by a pack of the infected, then I'm not coming back for you," he whispered harshly. The two of them then snuck up a narrow corridor. Right, the elevator's still working. We can take that down to the lobby. I cleared it this morning, so it should be safe, reassured Michael. He stepped into the elevator, motioning for Emily to follow him. Upon reaching the lobby, Michael stepped out of the elevator, gun raised. Several bodies lay scattered about, having been killed earlier that morning. The whole lobby was in a state of disarray, with bullet holes lining the walls and furniture broken and knocked over, having been destroyed in some fight earlier that day. Bloodstains covered the carpet, dyeing sections of it dark red. Right, keep up, barked Michael. He led Emily towards a side exit, stepping over the body of a receptionist whose throat had been torn out, as if by some wild animal. Emily nearly tripped in a pool of her blood, which was still fresh. Outside, the distant shrieks of the infected could be heard, as well as sporadic gunfire. The air smelt of smoke, with just a hint of tear gas. Michael peered his head out at the side entrance of the hotel, looking up and down the street. It was littered with debris and parked cars, which had been abandoned by their owners. There was also a group of infected. However, they were all the way up the street, so far away that they couldn't notice he and Emily, as long as they made it to the car as quickly as possible. "What's going on out there? Is it safe?" whispered Emily. "Well, we'll have to move fast. They're infected, but they're all the way across the street," he replied. Emily nodded. "Okay, I'm ready," she whispered. Michael slowly cracked open the door to the side alley, peering out to see if the infected had noticed him. Luck was seemingly on his side that day, as the infected had their backs to him. They were focused on the opposite side of the city, where a helicopter was trying to take off. "Right, move now," he barked, running for their car, which was parked on the side street, not far from the exit of the apartment complex. Emily felt her heart in her throat as she ran. Michael was just ahead of her, his pistol in hand, and their car was just ahead, so close that Emily could nearly touch it. She was running as fast as she could manage, refusing to even look over her shoulder. She was thankful to find the passenger door unlocked, allowing her to jump into the car, seconds before Michael, who'd stopped to toss his luggage into the back seat. Once they were both in the car, Emily let out a sigh of relief. She waited for Michael to gun the engine and take them far away from the city. However, he simply sat quietly, as if waiting for something to happen. Emily grew annoyed with him quickly, wondering what he was doing. "Put this on," he stated, holding out a blindfold to Emily. "What? Why?" she inquired, giving him a suspicious glance. He glared at her, leaning in close and getting in her face. Michael was already growing tired of Emily, and he'd regretted bringing her along. "Just do it. I can't have you seeing where we're going or how to get there. My uncle wants to keep it all confidential," he replied. And so Emily took the blindfold from him, placing it over her eyes. She felt uneasy about where they were going. However, she was certain that it must be better than the city, which was now overrun by infected. "Good. We'll be there in about half an hour. My uncle has a place back in the mountains. We should be safe there. I'll do the talking when we arrive. As a matter of fact, it'd be best if you only speak when spoken to," Michael informed her, before starting the car and driving away. Part 5. Emily gasped when Michael pulled the blindfold from her eyes, shivering in the cold air. They'd been driving for quite some time, longer than she'd expected. "We're here. Remember what I told you. Don't speak unless spoken to. My uncle is not a patient man," he warned, giving Emily a stern look. She glanced around, rubbing her eyes as she took in her surroundings. It was after dark. A pale crescent moon hung in the sky, above the tops of tall, snow-covered trees. With surprise, Emily realized she was somewhere deep in the wilderness, miles from the city they'd left. The rocky, barren ground she stood on was covered in a layer of snow and ice. Emily glanced up to find that she stood in the front of an old building, one that looked as if it had been abandoned years before. Its weathered grey exterior was covered by graffiti, left by urban explorers and vandals. The old concrete building stood tall and was imposing, a faded chip sign hanging above its entrance, with the words Blackwood Sanatorium written in bold black letters. Realization dawned in Emily, as she recalled seeing the building before, albeit from a distance. It was close to the lodge where Josh and Samantha had taken them, on the night she and Michael had gone to the mines. Emily craned her neck, glancing up above the old sanatorium at the jagged, imposing peaks of the Rockies. Her heart raced in her chest as she breathed hard and fast, thinking of the lodge brought butterflies into Emily's stomach. Hannah and Bet had died in the mines there, killed by she and Michael. Emily was somewhat apprehensive about what had happened. Her worst fears had been that she might be caught, that some sort of evidence might be given to the police, which would lead to her arrest. If that happened, she planned to turn against Michael in an effort to save herself. Emily did not feel remorse for what she'd done. She justified what she and Michael had done weeks before the actual killing. The act had been empowering, and she wanted to do it again. "How does it feel to be back?" inquired Michael. He stood behind her, fixing her with an inquisitive stare. Emily slowly turned to face him, swallowing a lump in her throat. "It feels great. I enjoyed what we did. It was exhilarating, although those creatures from the mines were completely unnerving," she replied, casting a nervous glance over her shoulder. Michael rolled his eyes. "You mean the Wendigo?" He sighed, and Emily nodded. She hated the spindly, spider-like creatures with their claws and glowing eyes. They haunted her nightmares, pursuing her down long, endless tunnels, their claws scraping on the floor. The Wendigo had taken the bodies of Hannah and Beth, devouring them, ensuring that their bodies were never found, which had actually proven to be a benefit. "Look, you don't need to be afraid of them. They're easy enough to keep at bay. The Wendigo fear fire. As long as you stay near a good roaring fire, you're safe. Fire is one of the few things which can kill the creatures," explained Michael. Emily relaxed slightly. "Really? Well, that's good to know, though I still feel really exposed out here." Michael turned his back to her, ignoring her concerns. "Come with me. We'll go inside. And remember to keep quiet. My uncle isn't keen on you being here." Michael marched up the old stone steps which led to the sanatorium, the snow crunching beneath his boots with every step. Emily followed him, keeping pace a few feet behind him. A strong gust of wind blew through the air, causing the sign above their heads to swing back and forth, smacking the wall loudly as it did so. Upon reaching the doors of the sanatorium, Michael froze in his tracks, knocking 3 times at the door, bashing his fist into it with all his might. He then raised his hands to his face, doing something which Emily found bizarre, shouting as loudly as he could manage. Michael made the sound of an owl. He did this about 3 times and then went silent, waiting to hear what the reply would be. After a moment, the door was thrown open, and a man stood inside, dressed in black combat armor carrying an M4 carbine. His face was covered by a black mask, with cold eyes staring at Emily, sizing her up as if he was preparing to take her on. "Michael, we're glad you're here. Your uncle needs you ASAP. He wants to debrief you on what's happening," informed the black-clad stranger. And Michael nodded. "Thank you, I'll be there soon. Got caught up in the city," he stated. "Who's the woman?" inquired the black-clad stranger. "She's an associate of mine. I brought her along with me when I fled the city," Michael explained. The guard seemed to be annoyed with Emily's presence, glaring at her. "I guess you can bring her along. I'm certain your uncle can find some use for her," he muttered. Michael walked past him, stepping into the old building. Emily followed him, ignoring the part of her which wanted to flee. She was uneasy about the whole situation. Michael had never mentioned just how remote the place they were staying in would be. There was no one around for miles, and with the current epidemic, there'd likely be no police available if anything did go wrong. The sanatorium smelt odd, like old pennies that had been left in water. The unpleasant scent served to further the feelings of unease which Emily felt. Michael led her down a dark, cold corridor, past closed metal doors, each marked with alternating numbers. The windows to Emily's left side were broken, letting in a freezing draft, one that chilled her to the bone. "My uncle's office is just down the hall. Remember what I told you. You will be given a room here for the night. Just go to bed. We'll talk tomorrow," he muttered, not even stopping to look at her. "Will you be joining me?" replied Emily. "No," answered Michael, and he said nothing else to her, walking the rest of the way in silence. They reached a steel door at the end of the corridor, which Michael knocked on twice, receiving an answer from the opposite side. "Come in, I've been expecting you," stated a deep voice. Michael opened the door. Stepping into the office, it was old and stank of cheap cologne and whiskey. An aged priest sat behind a stained wooden desk, looking up at Michael with cold, emotionless eyes. He wore a long black robe with a set of rosary beads hanging from his neck. "Michael, I'm glad you're here. The infection has spread just as we planned. Our experts in Mexico were correct in their estimates. America has gone dark, as has Europe and large parts of Asia. Soon Canada will follow. We must begin preparations," he informed us. Michael nodded. "Of course, we've waited a long time for this day," he replied, and he then motioned to Emily. "It might be best if we gave her a room for the night. I'd rather avoid prying eyes for what's ahead," he suggested. His uncle gave Emily a brief and disinterested look. "Very well, she can sleep in room 6. It's just down the corridor," replied the priest, without bothering to even look at Emily. Michael spoke to her. "Go to room 6. Here's the key. You'll find a suitable bed and shower inside," he muttered, shoving an old iron key into her hand and ushering her out of the office, slamming the door behind her with a loud thud. Emily stood alone in the corridor, her key in hand, walking slowly down the rows of doors until she came to one marked with a rusted 6. It was only a single door down from the office. Emily wondered just what she'd gotten herself into here. The sanatorium was a better alternative to the city, but only slightly so. The guard who'd greeted them sat by the entrance, still sat near by the front door, watching it, as if he expected someone to burst in at any moment. He had his back to Emily, a fact she was glad of, as his stare had been unnerving. The last thing she wanted was to speak with him. Emily wrapped her hand around the handle of the door, taking the key Michael had given her from her pocket. The old key unlocked the door to room 6. She pushed it open, wincing as its hinges squeaked loudly. This door could use a healthy dose of oil. Why on earth does Michael want me to stay here? This place is just weird and creepy, muttered Emily. She then stepped into her room, closing the door behind her. The room was rather spartan, having only a sink, toilet, shower, and bed, one with a small chest sitting at the end of it. Emily sighed tiredly. Walking over to the bed, she tossed her purse onto it, and then knelt down to see what was in the chest. The chest was aged, just like everything else at the sanatorium, its exterior covered in scratches and dents, as if its previous owner had treated it terribly. Emily slowly opened the lid, peering inside. She found an old white nightgown, one that was still in good condition. The gown was the only thing in the chest, which was made from cedar wood and lined with purple velvet, its overpowering scent filling Emily's nose. The gown smelt strongly of some unknown perfume, making Emily certain that it had been worn before. But she was too tired to care. It was so late, and she was ready for bed. The fact that she was safe from the infected also gave her some comfort. Emily prepared for bed, removing the clothing she'd worn in the city, and taking a brief shower, just long enough to warm up a bit in the hot water. Just as Emily was about to go to bed, she heard a faint noise, one that sounded like Michael talking away to his strange uncle. It was coming from an air vent on the left side of the room. The voices were engaged in a heated conversation, one that was too muffled for Emily to clearly make out. She walked over to the air vent, placing her ear up against it. "Michael, the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola are crucial. You are finally ready to learn more about them. By sacrificing the Washington girls, you have proven yourself worthy," informed the priest, and he spoke in a booming voice, one that echoed on the stone walls of the room. "Thank you, Uncle. When can you begin to teach me?" Michael said. "I can teach you only this, to learn the secrets which Loyola himself has passed down. You must submit wholly to the order and to your superiors. Theirs is an oath which we have all sworn, one that binds us to the order. informed the old priest. "I will take the oath. I wish to serve the Order. You have my word, Uncle. My loyalty to my brothers in the Order has been proven many times over," answered Michael. Well, his uncle was about to reply when shouts sounded from elsewhere in the old sanatorium. A woman was yelling something, arguing with a group of men. "Oh, what on earth is all that racket? I informed everyone that I wished for quiet tonight," he growled. The shouting drew closer to Emily. Whoever was yelling had been running down the hallway. Emily left the air vent then, walking over to the door of her room. She peeked out, wondering just what was going on. Upon looking out into the corridor, she was surprised to find someone she recognized. "Jessica?" Emily whispered. Stepping out of her room into the corridor, Jess spun around to face Emily, looking at her with shock. "What on earth are you doing here?" she shouted, looking at her former friend with confusion and distrust. "I came here with Michael. What are you doing here?" Emily retorted. "Listen, I need your help. These insane people are trying to kill me," stammered Jessica, looking over her shoulder. Emily stood silently, wondering just what she should do. "Over here. I saw her run over here," shouted Michael. Emily could hear heavy boot-clad feet running towards her. Well, she wanted to learn more about this dark magic. Getting Beth and Hannah had left her with a feeling of great power, one that she wanted to feel again. "Michael, here! She's here!" Emily screamed. She surged forward, grabbing Jessica and slamming her into a wall. "No, let me go! Stop!" she screamed, struggling against Emily. "Michael, come quick, I can't hold her for long," Emily replied. Jess was stronger than she'd expected, and she pushed Emily back, attempting to flee. But Emily tackled her to the ground, punching her hard in the side. "Why are you doing this? We used to be friends, don't you remember?" shouted Jess, crawling away from her attacker. Emily tried to catch up with her, looking at the guard near the door, who was unsure of what to do, as he couldn't risk shooting Jess without hitting Emily too, an action that might anger Michael. Emily crawled atop Jess, pinning her arms to her side. "You can't leave. Michael needs you." "I want to kill again," growled Emily. Jess used her knees to shove Emily backwards. The two struggled on the floor, with Jess gaining the upper hand. She now had Emily pinned against the wall. Driving an elbow into her ribs, she bit Emily on the shoulder, making her scream and lose her grip on Jess. Jess then took the opportunity to flee, leaving Emily behind. She made a run for the door, kneeing the guard in the groin when he tried to stop her. He stumbled back against the wall, grunting in pain, unable to stop Jess as she ran out of the front door, disappearing into the dark forest outside. Emily slammed her fist into the wall, groaning with frustration. "Why didn't you try and stop her?" she shouted at the guard, who glared daggers in her direction, ignoring her comment. Michael and his uncle rounded the corner to find Emily standing by herself. "She bit me. I'll kill her for that," she fumed. Michael ran over to the door, looking outside. "It doesn't matter. She has nowhere to go. We'll track her down tomorrow. Good job trying to stop her." Michael then walked over to Emily, pulling out a pistol, which he handed to her. "If you see her again, shoot her in the leg next time. My uncle wants to dispose of her personally," he directed. Emily nodded in agreement, taking the gun from him before returning to the bed for the night. Part 6. Samantha was in shock at what Emily had told her, her hands trembling. She sat still in the interrogation room, its bland white walls reminding her of a doctor's office. Across from her sat the person who'd taken her best friend away. "You killed them," she muttered, glaring at Emily, who nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I helped kill them. I don't regret what I did, not at all. So don't bother expecting an apology," she retorted, leaning forward on her elbows to stare at Samantha. Emily's eyes were cold and mocking, devoid of regret or guilt. Samantha sat back in her chair, letting what she'd been told sink in. "Hannah was my best friend," she growled, leaning in and close to her captive. Emily just smirked at her. "Is that supposed to mean something to me?" she retorted. Samantha rose to her feet, standing up so fast that the chair clattered to the floor. Jess stood up too. "Don't do anything rash. We might still need her," she warned. Samantha glared at Emily, contemplating what her next move would be. The door behind them thudded open, allowing Josh to storm back into the room. "I knew it. I knew you had something to do with what happened. Why did you and Michael kill my sisters?" he roared. "Oh, she's sick, Josh. Michael convinced her to help kill them. It was part of some occult ritual," Samantha replied. She then reached for her sword, considering cutting down Emily then and there. Josh surged forward, grabbing Emily and shoving her against the wall, before binding her hands. Samantha was confused, and she gave Josh a perplexed look. "What are you doing? I thought you wanted to kill her," she said. Josh sighed. "No, at first that's what I wanted. Now I think she'd make a good hostage. You can use her to draw Michael out, stop his man from just shooting us on sight," he reasoned. Emily struggled and protested as he tied her up. However, Josh paid her no mind. He dragged Emily towards the door, keeping an iron grip on her arm. Samantha and Jess followed behind him. "Well, if I were riding for the sanatorium, then we need more people. Michael's got a lot of men with him. I counted at least 24 when I was held at the sanatorium," confided Jess. The four of them made their way into the sitting room, where Christopher was waiting for them. He'd been watching a DVD as he waited to find out what Josh would do with Emily, having been certain that his friend would kill her, as he'd been enraged when she was captured. He was surprised to find Emily alive. "So what now? Weren't you going to kill her?" he inquired, looking Emily up and down. "Oh, not yet. We're going to use her as a hostage to draw Michael out," informed Josh. Christopher stood up. "I'm coming with you. My horse is already saddled and ready," he announced. "Michael's at the sanatorium. He has a lot of men with him. We'll need to be smart about this," stated Samantha. And she walked past Josh, stepping out of Christopher's house. With a whistle, she then called her horse, which trotted over to her, snorting loudly. Michael was right behind her, with his captive. "Let go of me. You can't do this," protested Emily. She was trying to run from Josh, but with very little success. "Oh, stop. Don't bother trying to run. We will find you," he stated, shoving Emily in the direction of his horse. She was forced to ride in front of Josh, to stop Michael from shooting at him. It was late in the afternoon now, and the sun would be setting soon, leaving them in darkness. Nevertheless, Josh was determined to get to Michael. He was far too angry to wait for even a single day. Christopher took a lever-action rifle from his saddlebags, loading it carefully. He, Samantha, and Jess had all mounted their horses, as they were prepared to leave, wanting to make it to the sanatorium before night fell. Some in the town had gathered to see the commotion. "What's going on? We thought you were going to kill her," stated one of the town guards. He carried a rifle and wore a dark jacket, with a red wool cap on his head. Josh shook his head. "We were going to go and deal with the man who attacked us. Emily's our hostage. Now, who will ride with us?" he inquired. A few people in the town volunteered to go with them, in order to prevent future attacks. By the time they rode out of the gate, there were 9 of them in total, all riding for the same destination. The whole ride was long and quiet. Hardly anyone spoke, as they were all focused on the task at hand. Emily glared at all of them with hateful eyes. "None of you will survive. Michael will kill all of you and rescue me," she shouted. "Oh, quiet. Not another word. I'm warning you, Emily," growled Josh. He'd grown tired of his captive and longed to end her, just as she'd done to his sisters. On either side of him, Jess and Samantha rode in step, glancing around at the nearby forest, expecting an ambush at any moment. The sun now sank even lower in the sky, creating long shadows across the path ahead of them. "It'll be dark soon. Perhaps we can use that as cover. Jess and I should take a few of the men, scout the sanatorium," suggested Samantha, and Josh nodded at her. "Oh, be careful. Michael's men are out for blood," he reminded her. Samantha urged her mount to go faster, motioning for Jess to follow her. They rode out ahead of the rest, riding quickly for the Black Mountain. Samantha moved silently through the forest, brushing aside low-hanging branches, keeping the beam of her flashlight low to avoid detection. Jess was just a few paces behind her, rifle in her hands. Both of them were trying hard to stay undetected. If Michael's men saw them first, then they would certainly open fire. "Oh, I wish I had an infrared scope," Jess whispered, looking around nervously. It seemed that Michael's men had yet to notice them, and they could see the sanatorium from where they were, a vantage point up above the old building, just through the trees. A few guards had been posted outside the front door. They watched the tree line with lazy, disinterested eyes. None of them were expecting to be attacked. "We need to wait until Josh gets closer. We can't begin our attack before he does," whispered Samantha. She then ducked behind a tree, watching the guards from a distance. Jess moved to a tree beside her, looking at the men through the scope of her rifle. They wore black body armor and carried assault rifles, with the White Sun logo on their chests. One of them was smoking as he chatted with his companion, both oblivious to the fact that they were being watched. "When the fighting starts, who do I shoot?" she asked. "Go for Michael or his uncle. They're the reason we're here," replied Samantha, and Jess nodded. Samantha then took out a small radio. "Josh, come in. Jess and I are in position," she whispered. The radio blared static for a moment before Josh replied. "Good. We're not far from you. We'll make our way up there shortly. How many enemies are we dealing with in the front?" he inquired. "There are 3 armed guards posted at the front entrance. Don't know how many are inside," replied Samantha. "Right, I'll be there soon. Be ready to take the shot." "We understand. Try and get here as quickly as possible. I don't want him slipping away." She then returned to watching the sanatorium, waiting for Josh to arrive. "Oh, I hope this works," whispered Jess, and Samantha nodded. "I just hope Josh knows what he's doing. Hopefully he doesn't get himself shot," she replied. They didn't have to wait long for Josh, Christopher, and the rest of the men to arrive, though. Within less than 30 minutes, the guards posted outside the entrance were alerted by shouting from the woods. Josh was holding Emily at gunpoint. "Let me go. Michael, I'm here. Help!" shouted Emily. "Quiet," barked Josh, placing the barrel of his shotgun against her head. "Listen to me all of you. No one else has to die tonight. Just Michael and her," he shouted, pointing at Emily. The guards posted outside took a few steps back, their weapons raised. None of them knew how to react. "Don't just stand there. He's not bluffing. Shoot him. Shoot him now before he kills me," pleaded Emily. Then the doors of the sanatorium burst open. "Everyone calm down. What on earth is the meaning of this?" shouted Michael's uncle. The old priest had a pistol in his hand, which he pointed at Josh, who slowly shook his head. "You made a mistake, old man, killing my sisters," growled Josh. Jess placed her crosshairs on the old man's head, her finger resting just above the trigger. Samantha placed a hand on her shoulder. "Keep an eye out for Michael. We have to get him too. He can't be allowed to escape, not after what he's done," she whispered, and Jess nodded, switching off her safety. For a moment, Michael and the old priest stared each other down, neither one wanting to make the first move. "Josh, I see you found our home. I'd say it's nice to see you again, but that'd be a lie," stated Michael. He now walked out of the sanatorium, assault rifle in his hands. Michael stood beside his uncle, glaring at Josh. "Hand her over now," he demanded. "You want her?" Josh replied, looking up at the man who'd killed his sisters. He then shoved Emily forward. "Here, take her," he yelled, raising his shotgun. Michael watched it all happen, seemingly in slow motion. He was unable to stop it or even speak a single word of protest before it had been done. Josh shot Emily in the back of the head, killing her instantly, blowing bits of her brains all over the snowy ground. Emily let out a final cry of protest, which was silenced by the deafening blast of Michael's shotgun. An instant later, Jess fired a bullet through the neck of the old priest. The sound of gunshot made the guards dive for cover, then firing on Michael and his men, killing one of them. The old priest fell to the ground, gurgling up blood as he coughed and sputtered. "Good shot," whispered Samantha, patting her on the shoulder. "No," screamed Michael. He was in shock at what had happened and wasn't thinking clearly. Michael couldn't believe his eyes. First Emily, and then his uncle had been killed. Rage filled him, and he gripped his rifle tightly, switching off the safety. Josh's shouting stirred him, making him look up from the old man's corpse. "You're next," he shouted, pumping his shotgun and advancing on Michael. He reacted quickly, raising his machine gun and firing in Josh's direction. The bullets missed him entirely, sailing past Michael and hitting the man beside him, so Josh rushed forward while his men engaged the last two guards. Michael had turned on his heels and was fleeing from Josh, dashing back inside the sanatorium. He slammed the door behind him just as Josh had reached the steps. "That won't stop me. You are dead, Michael, do you hear me? Dead," shouted Josh. He raised his shotgun, blasting away at the door's lock. Michael was running for his life, knowing that the door would not hold. He could hear the shotgun blast behind him as Josh pursued him. His uncle was dead, as was Emily, but now he needed to escape. The few of his uncle's men who remained met Michael in the hall. They were wearing the black body armor and carrying assault rifles. "Where is he? Where's Father Jackson?" one of them shouted, looking around frantically. My uncle's dead," stammered Michael. Samantha and Jess were watching as Josh burst through the open door, charging into the sanatorium. "I hope he knows what he's doing," sighed Samantha. "I'm sure he does," replied Jess. She stood up, brushing off the snow. "I got him. The old priest, he went down easy. I would have got Michael, but he ran for it," Jess said, and Samantha nodded, glancing around them. "We should get moving. If Michael tries to make a run out the back, we need to cut him off," she said. "Lead the way," Jess replied. Samantha began to hike through the thick forest, listening to the gunshots below her as Michael's men tried to hold off Josh. A distant noise made the hair on Samantha's neck stand on end. "What was that?" asked Jess. Samantha drew her sword. "Infected. Keep moving. The gunshots are drawing him in," she replied, stepping over a large stump which was in her path. Indeed, the pack of infected was close by, drawing closer with every gunshot, which they all heard, and the creatures howled loudly as they advanced, hunting for prey. Samantha moved quickly, following the sounds of the battle below. As they moved from one side of the sanatorium to the other, she could now see the back exit, which only had a single guard posted. Jess trailed behind, carrying her rifle. "The exit is here. There's only a single guard. If Michael wants to escape, then he'll have to come out this way," whispered Samantha. Jess walked up beside her, raising a rifle. "Got it. Right, I'll wait for him. He won't get past us," she whispered. Behind her, the infected shouted as they charged out of the tree line. Samantha groaned with annoyance, raising her sword. "Right, I'll take care of them," she muttered, leaving Jess to watch the exit. Samantha whistled at the horde of infected, twirling her sword about. The one closest to her charged, but Samantha moved forward to meet it, impaling it on her blade. The infected fell to the ground, grunting loudly. Next, two more attacked, and Samantha cut off the first one's arms, then stabbed it in the head, decapitating its companion with a single blow, sending its head flying in the opposite direction of its body. The rest of the infected then attacked her, all of them full into her blade. One's throat was cut, another received a deep cut into its chest, putting it down quickly. Samantha slashed and thrust her blade, killing infected after infected, until there were none left to charge at her. Then she knelt down, cleaning her blade with one of the shirts which had belonged to her fallen foes. "Hey, "I see him," shouted Jess. Samantha sheathed her sword, rushing back to where Jess lay prone. Michael had emerged from the sanatorium. He shouted at the guard posted there, pointing back to where he'd come. His face was flushed and angry. "Take the shot. Now," directed Samantha. Jess placed her crosshairs on his head and pulled the trigger. Finale. Josh charged up the steps just a few paces behind Michael. He had his shotgun raised and was prepared to blast Michael in the back. However, he proved to be too fast for Josh, darting inside the sanatorium and slamming its door behind him with a loud crash. Josh glanced behind him to see Christopher killing the last guard, who'd attempted to protect Michael. The men who'd accompanied them had taken the assault rifles, which the guards had carried, replacing their bolt-action rifles. Josh glanced beside him, where Michael's uncle lay motionless, having been shot by Jess just after Josh had killed Emily. Good shot, Jess, he thought, walking over to his corpse and giving it a light kick, just to make certain that he really was dead. Josh could now hear Michael shouting inside the sanatorium, trying to rally the last of his uncle's men, who'd been inside during the attack. "Michael will try to escape," stated Christopher. He walked up the stairs behind Josh, reloading the rifle which he carried, pulling bullets from the bandolier he was wearing. Josh turned to face him. "I know. Jess and Samantha will cut him off. He won't get away this time," he responded. "Good. He won't be attacking us again," replied Christopher. Josh walked over to the door of the sanatorium, pointing his shotgun at the lock. "Get ready. We have no idea how many of them are left," he warned. Took at least 2 blasts from his shotgun, as well as a hard kick to break open the door. Then Josh burst into the sanatorium, shotgun raised, his head on a swivel. He stood in what had once been a waiting room decades before. An old couch sat in the corner next to a dusty stool, which had once held magazines, which visitors to the sanatorium had read. In front of him sat a desk with a rolling chair behind it, upon which a single lit lamp sat, casting a weak glow across the room. The sanatorium stank badly, as if something were rotting inside. Josh was unsure of what was causing the smell, and it was making his eyes water. He crept forward, advancing towards a corridor to his right, which led into the rest of the building. Christopher was right behind him, moving slowly and quietly. Both of them took cover behind a wall, peering down the corridor, which was lined with steel doors on one side, broken windows on the other. Josh dove back behind cover as bullets whizzed by his head, missing him by inches. One of Michael's men stood at the end of the hallway, having heard Michael shooting his way in, having lain in wait for him. "You're finished. You'll be hunted down for what you did today, all of you," the man shouted. Josh just pumped his shotgun, shaking his head slowly. "No, the only one being hunted today is Michael," he replied. He then began to fire around the corner, peppering the corridor with buckshot. The black-clad man fell to the ground, firing his weapon at the wall beside Josh, sending dust and plaster flying everywhere. "None of you are leaving here alive. Not after what you did to my sisters," bellowed Josh. He then moved forward, kicking open each door he came across, cleaning the rooms with his shotgun. He found a rotting dead body in the first room, which sat chained to a bed. The sight made Josh recoil, as he realized just what that smell had been. The body must have been there for months, yet another victim of Michael's uncle. He then moved on to the next door, shoving it open. Inside was an infected, one which he'd never seen before. It had a bizarre fungal growth which covered its head entirely. The infected made a bizarre clicking sound, one which Josh had never heard before either. For a moment, Josh stood perfectly still, and the creature failed to notice him. It seemed to look straight through him. "What on earth is that?" whispered Christopher. Josh slowly shook his head. "I have no idea. I don't think it can see very well," he replied. Josh then raised his gun, pointing it at the infected. His movement drew its attention, making it charge at him with a snarl. The blast of buckshot which followed knocked the creature on his back, making a massive hole in its chest. Josh and his allies then moved down the corridor together, clearing 3 more rooms. 2 of the black-clad men were found, hiding in the last room, waiting to ambush them once their backs were turned. Josh killed both of them without hesitation, leading his group of men. By now they were close to the office at the end of the hall, where Michael's uncle had worked. "Stay alert. Michael is probably holed up in that office," warned Josh. "Oh, we'll get him," replied one of the men. He stood beside Christopher, a rifle in his hands, and before Josh could stop him, he made a run for the door. "Wait! Stop!" shouted Christopher, but the man ignored him, yanking open the door, preparing to kill Michael. Michael watched the door to his uncle's office open. Outside, Christopher was shouting something, a warning. Michael raised his rifle, unloading on the man as he opened the door, killing him instantly. He then hauled himself over the desk, firing his weapon on fully automatic as he stormed out into the corridor. This took Josh by surprise. He'd not expected Michael to be so bold. He and Christopher dove for cover as Michael killed the rest of their men, who'd reacted too slowly to his counterattack. "You're all dead. Do you have any idea who my uncle was? Look, even if you kill me, we have powerful friends who will hunt you all down," he shouted, dropping an empty magazine from his rifle. As he reached for a fresh one, Josh stepped out, pointing his shotgun at Michael. "Drop it," he demanded, and Michael did as he was told, dropping his rifle to the floor. He raised his hands above his head, glaring at Josh. "You think killing me will change anything? You're still a dead man," he sneered. Josh slowly shook his head. "Those your last words," he replied. Michael nodded. Josh prepared to pull the trigger. Just as he was about to, Michael grabbed the barrel of his gun, tackling him to the ground, and the 2 men began to fight over the gun, each trying to get control over it. "I won't let you kill me," shouted Michael, and he began to pummel Josh, hitting him with everything he had. Josh swung the butt of his shotgun, connecting with Michael's face, and this sent him flying backwards, slamming into the wall behind him, knocking the wind out of him. Christopher surged out of the room, which he'd taken cover in, making his way over to Michael, who was in a daze now. Christopher raised his rifle, preparing to shoot him, only to have Michael attack his legs with a sweeping kick, knocking him to the ground, sending his rifle flying from his grasp. Christopher watched from the floor as Michael fled, making his way over to the rear exit. Josh raised his shotgun to stop him, and upon pulling the trigger he heard only a dull click, as he realized he'd forgotten to reload. Michael had made it to the exit, bursting out and slamming the door behind him. Josh and Christopher scrambled to their feet, preparing to pursue their target. Michael stood outside now, preparing to flee. Only one of his uncle's men remained, who stood guarding the door, waiting to shoot Josh and Christopher if they tried to pursue him. Michael knew where his uncle's car was hidden. It was further down the mountain, nearby the road. Reaching it would mean he'd survive. He was about to break into a sprint, when something hit the side of his face. Hard. He screamed, falling to the ground while clutching the now bleeding side of his face. His vision was blurry as blood ran down, dripping onto the ground, turning the snow red. Michael quickly realized that something was very wrong. He couldn't see his right hand, which was pressed against his face. He rolled onto his back, looking up at his final guard, who was rushing over to help him. Before he could reach Michael, Samantha stepped out of the forest, cutting him down. The guard fell to the ground, clutching his throat as blood ran between his fingers. Michael reached for his pistol now, preparing to shoot Samantha. However, she proved to be far too fast for him. Within moments she was on him, her blade at his throat. "Don't even try that. Take out your pistol and throw it over there," she ordered, pointing towards the forest. Oh, she was taking no chances with him after what he'd done to her best friend. Michael froze, giving her a hateful glare. He narrowed his remaining eye, rage coursing through him as he realized just who'd shot him. But he did as she told him, tossing the gun into the forest. You think this is over? You're all dead. Someone will come for me. My uncle was a very powerful man, he ranted. Samantha lowered her sword. I'll save your breath. You can explain yourself to Josh, she replied. Michael shook with rage as he looked past Samantha. His rifle lay behind her, where he dropped it. Samantha followed his gaze, noticing the gun. I know what you're thinking, Michael. But don't, she instructed, walking over to the fallen weapon and giving it a hard kick, which sent it sliding across the ground, even further out of his reach. Jess then stepped out of the forest, walking over to where Samantha stood. She'd meant to kill Michael. He's lucky he moved his head at the last minute. If not, he'd be dead now, she stated, wishing she had killed him. Oh, it won't matter. As soon as Josh gets here, he's going to die anyway. That was a good shot, Jess, praised Samantha. For a moment, she and Jess stood over Michael, looking down at him. Soon it would be over. Josh would kill him, allowing them to go back to their lives. The door behind them banged open as Josh and Christopher rushed out of the sanatorium. Both of them had their weapons raised as they expected a fight. Don't shoot, it's us, Samantha shouted, Josh quickly lowering his shotgun. He looked first at Samantha, then at Michael. Wow, what on earth happened? Exclaimed Christopher. Well, I tried to kill Michael. He moved his head, though, just as I pulled the trigger, so I only ended up taking his eye rather than his life, informed Jess. Josh smiled. Good. I wanted to kill him myself, he replied, walking over to Michael. Samantha and Jess stood aside, leaving Josh and Michael alone. Any last words? Josh inquired, pointing his weapon at Michael now. Michael looked down the barrel of the shotgun in his face, trying to think of a way he could escape. Listen, you don't need to kill me. I know a lot about this pandemic. I can tell you everything, just don't kill me, he pleaded. Josh snorted, shaking his head. I'm not buying that for even 1 second. You're lying, Michael. Lying to save yourself, and it won't work. Preparing to pull the trigger now. Wait, don't. There's a hospital outside Banff. My uncle was doing experiments there. I can show you everything, shouted Michael. But Josh shook his head. Not good enough. Not even close, he replied. Before Michael could even speak again, Josh pulled the trigger, ending him. Hours later, Josh and Samantha sat beside a fire pit outside their new home, safe behind the town walls. Samantha glanced over at Josh, watching as he roasted a marshmallow over the fire. She was happy to be back home. After a long day, she felt relieved knowing that Michael would trouble them no longer. These marshmallows were a great idea, stated Josh as he chewed a gooey mouthful, and Samantha slowly nodded. It's over now. We'll put all this behind us, she sighed, leaning up against Josh. How can you be sure it's really over? Michael and his uncle had powerful friends. If those people are still alive, then they could come for us, replied Josh. Well, whoever they are, they have no way of finding us. We're safe, Josh. It's over. She then looked up at the stars overhead, hoping she was right. In the distance, a wolf howled, his mournful call sending a shiver down Samantha's spine. Yeah, I think you may be right, Josh replied, and he placed an arm around her shoulders. We should still investigate that hospital which Michael mentioned, if for no other reason than to search it for supplies. Good idea, we can certainly do that. You should take Jess along with you. Could be a valuable learning opportunity. Samantha nodded, roasting her own marshmallow, holding her over the fire until it turned the perfect shade of caramel brown. Josh finally felt a sense of peace, for the first time since his sisters had died. He and Samantha stayed by the fire for a few more hours, before returning home for the evening. Well, epic story there. Sorry it's taken me a year and a half to do the follow-up to that first one. It kind of works as a standalone story, as I suggested at the start, but if you've listened to the other one before that, then it probably makes a bit more sense. Really enjoyed that. Great to enter the computer game world in such an engrossing and entertaining way. Really, really hope you enjoyed that one. Well, you know what it's like when I do these epic 2-hour stories. I'm absolutely knackered now, and I need a beer to quench my thirst and get over this dry throat. Definitely enough for me for one evening, but of course I'll be back again very, very soon. Till the next time, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.